Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and today our film is Hard Target. It's Die Hard in New Orleans. So Liam is on paternity leave, so he won't be joining us today, but this is a very special episode with a very special guest. So when we launched this podcast, I did an interview with a magazine called Pod Bible, and one of the questions they asked me was, who would be your dream guest for the show? And my answer was a gentleman by the name of Kyle Brandt. Now, Kyle is known to millions as the host of Good Morning Football on the NFL Network. He's also the host of his own show and podcast, Kyle Brandt's Basement. But most importantly, he is an action movie superfan. And having listened to him talk so passionately about action movies on other great film podcasts, I just had a feeling that we were kindred spirits. So I put it out into the universe, and thanks to my friend Shona, who introduced us and made this happen, I am thrilled to announce that our guest today is none other than Kyle Brandt himself. So a very warm welcome to Kyle.
Philip, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I can't sit still. I cannot wait to talk to you, to talk Hard Target. And I'm genuinely flattered and touched that you mentioned my name as the ideal person to come on. You could have said Jean-Claude Van Damme himself. You could have said Lance Hendrickson. You could have said anybody, and you said me, and I'm like, sign me up. And honestly, it had almost nothing to do with that. It was all the opportunity to talk about the major motion picture Hard Target, which is very close and dear to me.
So when you said you were willing to come on the show, there were a few other options, but this was the one that you gravitated towards. What is it about Hard Target that means so much to you? Why are you so excited to talk about it?
Well, before I even get into that, I'm glad I could be here because I haven't announced this or anything, but I have a second job now. That's kind of a big deal. I am passing out flyers with a phone sex line on the community, and it's good work. It's good, honest work. A lot of my coworkers have disappeared mysteriously, but I'm still making green doing that, and I'm into it. The honest question, other than the similarity between what I do and what Chance does in the movie, is the second I saw the words Hard Target, I'll tell you why. Because there are many podcasts that talk about Die Hard, of course. There are many podcasts that talk about even other Van Damme movies. You could find Bloodsport podcasts and Kickboxer podcasts, and then the ones that make fun of them, and Sudden Death, and Tag Team, and Double Impact. Hard Target is this one little jewel in the Van Damme IMDb in which he was a massive star. It's really strange. The visuals of it are awful. It only exists mostly in jokes about his haircut and punching a snake, and that's it. And yet I submit there are some incredible things in this movie that don't get talked about. So the second I saw Hard Target, I'm like, this is my movie. I saw it in the theater when I was in 8th grade, and I remember it vividly. And I'm just
tell us about
to talk
that.
About it.
I'd love to. What are your memories of actually seeing this movie in the theater?
Well, my memories are, this is immediately post Universal Soldier. Universal Soldier was near and dear to me because it was Frank Dukes fighting against Ivan Drago. I mean, this was a really cool thing. Now, is it the Dollar Store Terminator? Absolutely. But Dollar Store Terminator is still great. I saw that. Van Damme wears the eyepiece and they're soldiers and he fights Dolph Lundgren. I just thought it was so great. So in the wake of that, I would have seen anything that Van Damme did. I was fully on board. And this is like the trailers at the time when Hard Target was coming out. They would sell Van Damme as a package. And I remember that one of the trailers said, Wham Bam Van Damme. And I was like, oh my God, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. I'm 14 and he jump kicks people. And apparently now they're hunting him. And he has this wild haircut and I gotta see it. So my best friend Parker and I we went opening night and we absolutely were just in love with it. And Van Damme was having about a half decade here where he was one of the biggest stars in the world.
Yeah. I kind of came to the Van Damme party almost retrospectively. Like I've grown to love him more and more and more as the years have gone on, in an almost unironic way. You know, I think he's a real movie star. Obviously, he started with these kind of canon pictures that were a little funky, a little more low budget, and he kind of worked his way into doing these more high quality studio pictures. And here's my other question for you about Van Damme and this film is do you think this is Van Damme's best film? Because I do.
That's a good question. Well, listen, it's certainly in a lot of ways his most pedigreed. Obviously, with John Woo, there's a big budget behind it. The action set pieces are huge. Lance Henriksen is a respected guy. I can't believe we've gotten this far into the conversation and not said the words Wilford and Brimley yet, which is one of the
we're getting there.
craziest
Don't
third
worry.
act megastars.
Don't worry.
I assume we'll have a Wilford Brimley
We're
conversation.
allowing plenty of space for Wilford. No worries.
This is the best pod ever.
Uncle
I'm so
Duvet
excited.
is high on the agenda here today. Don't you worry.
Is it his best film? It may be his best film because it really is beautifully done in a lot of different ways. I think his like the one that he'll be remembered by is probably still Bloodsport, and I think that's a lot of the first films we've seen. I wonder you, Philip. You said you came to him maybe different way than some people did. Do you remember the first Van Damme movie you ever saw? Which was it?
Oof, that's a great question. I suspect it probably was Universal Soldier because that was kind of the most mainstream. I discovered the later stuff like Bloodsport kind of weirdly late. You know, I only a couple of buddies of mine, it was St. Patrick's Day about 5 years ago, and they were like, right, you've never seen Bloodsport, we need to address this. And the first time I watched it, I was like, what are we watching? This has the production values of bad porn. This is unwatchable. The next day I watched it again, and I'm like, because I was sort of, there's something there, but I can't kind of unpack it. Now I watch it every week. I fall asleep to it. I have naps to it. It's my comfort blanket.
Sure.
But Universal Soldier, like you, was this. Yeah, I was all about the Terminator, and Universal Soldier, as you say, was kind of your dollar-stored Terminator. But one of the things I think is interesting about Van Damme and placing it in context with this movie is the same thing I think is true with Arnold. Is when you have an actor that English isn't their first language and they're more known for their physicality. If you look at the difference between the movies that they make with a kind of real director like Roland Emmerich, or in this case, John Woo, or Peter Hyams, who directed Time Cop and Sudden Death, and their more high quality studio pictures, you really see the difference. And I think the same's true with Arnold when he worked with like McTiernan on Predator, or when he worked with Paul Verhoeven on Total Recall, or the James Cameron collaborations. It elevates them because it's a real director with a real kind of sure hand. So I liked Van Damme, but I've come to I've come to love him as the years have gone by.
Well, I think to your point, you know, I look at somebody, I consider his real contemporary is Steven Seagal. And Steven Seagal has done some crappy movies and they're aged terribly, some are beloved, but he worked with Andrew Davis on Under Siege. Andrew Davis went on to direct The Fugitive. This is a real director, not some guy doing some action thing in Brooklyn. And Under Siege is probably Seagal's most respected movie, and Tommy Lee Jones is in it, and there's all these great actors. So it's interesting when our kickers and our punchers get a shot with a guy who is an Oscar caliber, or a girl who's an Oscar caliber director. Can they really shine? And I like it especially with Van Damme because, tell me if you agree with me, Philip.
Yeah.
I think when you go out of the 80s and into the 90s, the major leagues, like the two big guys are still Arnold, of course, and Sly, because Sylvester Stallone is still going to come out with Cliffhanger and stuff. Right. And then below that, I feel like it was Van Damme and Seagal, who had a 5 or 6 year run of just straight action movies, and some of them were box office hits and some of them were big. But this is really like Van Damme's chance at an art film. Yeah. Despite all the campiness that shows up here and there, it's actually kind of a beautiful movie.
Yeah, I unapologetically love this movie to the point, but I'm weirdly like I almost find it moving, especially the stuff at the beginning with the homeless community and the way that's done, and that's like John Woo's lyricism and the poetic quality of his. But before we get too carried away, do you think it is his best film? And then I'm going to move on to some our Die Hard stuff. But I want to kind of pin you down, like, as to how would you rank his top 3 in your mind?
So you start to split hairs between the semantics of best film versus favorite film.
Yes,
that gets really hard. I don't think he made a better movie. I really don't. I guess I would say it's his best film. It's not my favorite Van Damme movie.
Okay,
I think Bloodsport still is, and I like Universal Soldier, and I like Kickboxer. And I have this strange, perverse pleasure for Cyborg, which is my first Van Damme movie that I ever saw, which is raw as hell and really ambitious, and he gets crucified in the film, and then he saves himself from crucifixion by kicking the cross. So it probably is his best film, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. My other question related to this, a sub question is this in the top 5 mullets of all time in action movie history?
You know,
I would say yes.
I think it has to be. I mean, immediately, if you're talking action movie mullets, I would just go to the GOAT, who is Martin Riggs, played by Mel Gibson in the Lethal Weapon 1 and 2. And then I think by the time at 3, he lost it. I would go further, though. Like, in an effort to make more people take this movie seriously and embrace it, if I could go back and change one thing, I would change the hair. And it was amazing at the time. But you, as a young person especially, if you're in the TikTok generation or you're a Stranger Things kid, you can't watch this movie and think of anything else other than his hair. It's way too distracting.
Yeah.
And you said top 5 action mullets. I think it might be the worst hairstyle in movie history. And I'm thinking, like, it's up there with the big dogs, and I will rat them out to you. I'm talking Kiefer Sutherland and the Lost Boys.
Got him on the list. Yep.
Oh, you got a list too? What's on your list?
Well, I don't want to. I've got Kurt in Tango and Cash, right? He's in the Hall of Fame for me. Hall of Fame of mullets. I've got Rambo, of course, right? Like a pseudo mullet, but it's kind of a classic.
Yep.
The one I was dying to ask you was, would you throw Bosworth in there? Would he? Is he an honorable mention for best action movie mullet for his sterling work in Stone Cold?
Yeah, absolutely. That's got to be in there because he has the flat top too, and it's bleached. His hair is actually a little bit like Kiefer's in the Lost Boys.
Yeah. I think it was a homage. it was a homage. You know what I think is interesting? There's actually the mullet actually serves a practical purpose because of Woo's obsession with slow motion. The mullet moves, right?
You're right.
If he didn't
You're
have,
so right.
There's actually an aesthetic justification for this mullet. You know, I can make an artistic case for this mullet.
It's true. It is like at a car dealership when they have those wind puppets to catch your eye to come and buy a car. When he's doing either a spin kick or riding on a motorcycle, it does almost become a character in and of itself. It's all over the film. You can't
controls
stop looking
gravity. It's sentient potentially.
It not only is it sentient, it is a species of mullet within a mullet. It is this wet mullet. It constantly looks like it's soaking wet. It's not a dry thing that's all feathery or anything like that. It is soaking wet, and you can't take your eyes off it.
Yeah, there was a quote from Van Damme where he said, "John Woo made me look like a samurai with greasy hair." And I think that might be the final word on that subject. So this show is about Die Hard and movies that Die Hard has influenced. So before we get too into the weeds, because we could talk Van Damme till the mullets come home, I just want to run through a few top line fact checks just to put this all in context within the other films that we've done on the show. So Hard Target is about an out of work merchant seaman who stumbles on a human hunting ring in New Orleans and decides to fight back. The movie was released by Universal in the US on August 20th, 1993. Came out 2 weeks after the last film that we did, which we just mentioned, which was The Fugitive, that came out on August 6th. Great era for action movies in 1993. It's actually coming up on its 30th anniversary this year. Directed by John Woo and produced by Sean Daniel, James Jacks, Sam Raimi was also one of the executive producers. Written by Chuck Farrer, who also appears as Douglas Binder, the first victim. And of course it stars Jean-Claude Van Damme, Lance Henriksen, Yancy Butler, Wilford Brimley, and Arnold Vosloo. And on an estimated budget of $20 million, it grossed $74.2 million. So pretty solid. Some of that, and presumably $6-7 of that came from Mr. Carl Brandt's pocket, or however much movie tickets were. Did you go and see it more than once, or just?
No, I think just once. But I was still so young. It came from Bob Brandt's wallet, my father. Yeah, and so I think it was probably $7 in Vernon Hills, Illinois, at the time in 1993.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So we do a section of the show now, which is called Die Hard DNA, which is where we actually outline some of the direct connections. Sure. I have my list. If you have any thoughts as to how this connects to Die Hard, please throw them in. But here's our Die Hard DNA that I managed to identify with this one.
Go on.
One, it has the word hard in the title. So that works. And the title kind of describes the hero in the way that it does with Die Hard. Chance Boudreaux definitely dies hard. He's hard to kill. He's to quote another Seagal classic, he's a hard target. Indefatigable hero who is great at improvising and adapting. We also have this vivid villain who has a little bit of Gruber in him in the sense that he's sophisticated, he's cultured, he's quite stylish, kind of a natty dresser, Lance Henriksen in this movie, but he's more physically aggressive and nasty than Hans Gruber. There's also kind of I wonder what you think about this. That there's a Western vibe to this movie, right? Would you say like?
The motorcycle and the dirt bike is a horse, and the hair, and it's like even the town of New Orleans with. A lovely depiction of that city, by the way. I'm sure they're running this one over. It's like the worst depiction of a city ever, with just complete lawlessness, and we're killing veterans, homeless, just terrible. But yeah, it does feel like a little bit like if you're a gamer, like a Red Dead Redemption type feel too.
Yeah. He's kind of. I thought that too, particularly in the chase in the midsection with the bikes. It definitely felt like a Western sequence. The other big one that and of course, the reason I mentioned that in terms of Die Hard is because McClane is referred to as a cowboy and is called a cowboy by Gruber and so forth. So there's definitely, it's dealing with that kind of the idea of the cowboy archetype in a modern setting. The one thing that I noticed specifically though is by the finale, JCVD has stripped down to a McClane-esque white tank top.
You're right.
Which a weird number of films did. We talked about Ricochet recently. Denzel does it in that too. And the finale, I think, is very Die Hard. The finale, which we'll talk about, is for me the best part of the movie. But it also features a moment at the end where Van Damme is in a Mexican standoff. The bad guy is holding the leading lady hostage. He's forced to surrender his weapon, and he has a hidden weapon, exactly like McClane at the end of Die Hard. So, although, frankly, this is a movie that was like, look, I had to search pretty hard to find some Die Hard DNA and Die Hard connections. I just really wanted to do this movie because I love it. But there are definitely some links. So. Okay, we're going to move on to a section of the show now called Anatomy of an Action Movie, which is really where we kind of break down this is my sort of theory about, I don't know if you know this about me, Carl, but I'm also a screenwriter, so I think about this stuff a lot.
Sure.
And we break down the anatomy of an action movie by the premise, which sometimes incorporates a ticking clock. It doesn't really in this movie. The hero, the villain, the action, the humor, and sometimes the leading lady. So the premise of this movie is, I'm just going to summarize this, so just put it all in context. So the premise is thus: when he agrees to help a young woman searching for a missing father on the streets of New Orleans, Cajun sailor Chance Boudreaux stumbles on an organized business that facilitates the hunting of the homeless for wealthy clients. In the process, Chance becomes the cabal's latest target, but he quickly turns the tables, and soon the hunters become the hunted. How does that premise rank does that tantalize you as a premise? Is that a good premise in your mind?
Well, you hit all the notes. Turn the tables, hunter become the hunted, the idea that he wants to help, and, he has a heart of gold. So, yeah, I think the whole movie could just be called Hunter Becomes the Hunted. That's all you need to see right there, and I'm in.
Now, this also goes back to The Most Dangerous Game, really, right?
Yeah,
like this premise is which was the 1924 novella written by Richard Connell that was adapted and expanded into a 1932 RKO movie. The Most Dangerous Game, if you're not familiar with it, for our listeners, is about a big game hunter who ends up on a mysterious island and is then hunted himself by a wealthy psychopath. A lot of other films have explored this idea, right? Like Running Man. Surviving the Game. Are you on? I imagine you're across Surviving the Game with Ice-T and an incredible supporting cast. Avenging Force. Don't know if you're a Dudikoff guy. I imagine you might have a bit of a
American Ninja. I know Dudikoff.
The Hunger Games, The Hunt. How do you rank this movie among this sort of subgenre of like Most Dangerous Game explorations?
Well, what I like about it, is that it distinguishes itself in a lot of ways. Where Lance Henriksen in this movie, he has a code and he has standards whereby we go for ex-military. We are not just pulling people out and regular. There's no challenge in that. We have guys who are qualified, who can stand on their own. It's kind of like in The Running Man when the Richard Dawson character, Dame Killian, says, I want someone who can fight back. Give me someone who can give me some ratings. And they find Schwarzenegger, and it's like, now we got something. So, listen, if you're going to ask, I think that Hunger Games clearly is the franchise. I think that The Running Man is the most beloved, and for people like us, But again, we're coming across a pattern here, Philip, where Hard Target is forgotten, it's underrated, it's not looked back on. I don't think this movie, outside of him punching a snake, has a lot of profile online, especially for young people, and it should.
Well, we're going to change that today. We're going to redress
Hell yes.
the cultural balance. You and I.
This is our code.
It's also kind of a great, another subgenre that I call like the fucked with the wrong guy movie.
Hell
you know,
yes.
like John Wick kind of speaks to that. Mad Max, Death Wish, Rolling Thunder. There's a whole bunch of there's a slight revenge element turning the tables to this
There is.
movie
And
that I love.
there's a quirkiness that they try to establish with Chance. And I guess it gets back to your Die Hard comparisons. The first time we see John McClane, he's not kicking ass, he's not cracking wise, he's not even smoking. He's on an airplane and he's really uncomfortable and he learns how to make fists with his feet. And it's this funny thing that, oh, this guy's kind of weird and funny. The introduction to Van Damme in Hard Target, he is eating a bowl of crappy gumbo at a diner table and he makes a joke about it. And it's like, oh, okay. There's a kind of a link there where you easily could just have had him walk out in some smoke and roundhouse kick people. And we'll get to that. But they go with the offbeat first to try to establish a little personality. And I feel like that was just a drop of the McClanean type character development.
You're right. It's kind of like it positions him. It's another aspect I love about the movie is that he's positioned as an underdog. He's down on his luck. He's out of work. He's implied to be homeless. We meet him kind of like in a pretty dire situation. So it's really cool. Of course, it's Van Damme as cast, so we kind of know that he's like got some tricks up his sleeve. But it is interesting. You're right that he is positioned as an underdog from the get-go. Mm-hmm. By the way, to your point, it's funny. I was just thinking. This is a slight side note, but I was thinking like. Is the guy on the plane who tells McClane to take his shoes off, is he the real villain of Die Hard? Technically, you know what I mean? Like, if it wasn't for him, that's the worst advice.
Also, does that help at all? You don't take your shoes off and make fists with your feet. If anything, that would make me more anxiety-ridden. It's not a comfortable thing to do. If he sits to any other chatterbox on the plane, he's got his shoes on the whole time. There's no glass. There's none of that. That's such a great take. He really is like the patient zero of the Nakatomi terrorist overtake.
He screws up everything. And he says, yes, sir, better than a shower and a hot cup of coffee. How? How is that better than a shower? Anyway, so he's I think he might be the real villain. There isn't really a ticking clock in this one, so we don't need to kind of get too into that. But as we're talking about Chance Boudreaux, let's talk about the hero section, right? Okay. Is this his best ever role? Is this Van Damme's best ever role?
It's not very dialogue heavy. You don't get to say much. I would define Van Damme's best role in the wherever he kicks ass the most.
Yeah.
So I don't know. They all kind of run together. It's like you're getting a solid plot every single time. He doesn't have a lot to say in this one, which is fine. I still go back to some of the more pure martial arts stuff.
Okay. I mean, that's obviously how he started with, as you said, Cyborg. He'd done a bunch of movies before that, right? Like Black Eagle and No Retreat, No Surrender. Then what's interesting about Van Damme as well is he kind of like keeps the band together with a bunch of those movies in that era, right? Like basically Kickboxer's a remake of Bloodsport, and Double Impact is like, okay, it's all the same people. It's like this. It's your guy Chun-Li, Bolo Young, right? Is back for Double Impact. The music is the same. Like it's all in the Far East, it's all in Asia. He kind of keeps a lot of the elements, and what I think's cool and that's fine. Like he has a formula, he kind of knows what his fans like. He plays to his strengths. But this one is quite a different character, and I think actually the fact that he doesn't have that much dialogue in this movie, it works in his favor because he can kind of be like the strong, silent type, and he doesn't need to. Complex dialogue or complex exposition isn't really his strong suit. What we want to see is him throwing those roundhouse kicks, right? I think this might be his best role. And like I said, he's done a bunch of movies that I love and a bunch of parts that I love. Frank Dukes is an all-timer, of course. Sure. But this is, I think it's a great role for him. It's kind of tailor-made, and I believe that the writer, when Van Damme signed on, changed the setting to New Orleans so that the Belgian accent, of course, it's actually, you know, it's French, it's a French community, but it's still it's close enough that it feels like organic for him. Whereas usually they have to be, oh, he's called Luc Devereaux, even though he's a Vietnam veteran. Like, don't worry about it, right? You know, they find some way to shoehorn it in. But I think it's one of his coolest.
I think
characters.
you know what's only missing from the role. And I'm surprised they deprived us of this. I'm very surprised there is not a stronger romantic storyline and that there is not a love scene. And sometimes in these action movies, they just run out of time. And the film Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of my favorite movies. Originally, there was supposed to be one with Arnold and Ray Don Chong, and they're just like, it doesn't make sense. We don't have time. Get it the hell out. Because normally, back in the day, they wanted a scene where they make out and do whatever, and it's just sitting there for you with these two characters, but they don't go to it, and I'm surprised.
Yeah, I think they might have done, from the research I did, I think it may have been cut, you know, because as you say, like it just doesn't really have the real estate, you know, and we don't, who cares? You know what I mean? Like I like Yancy Butler in this movie, and there is a moment where it seems like they're going to kiss and they dial up the chemistry. And then of course the snake is a bit of a cop block in that
It's a huge
in that moment.
I think what they ended up saying, Philip, they're like, look, we can keep one scene. You want to have the two of them make out, or do you want to have a guy get his ear cut off? You can only keep one. We're going with the ear.
Or
choice.
Punch the snake, you know. Like,
punch the snake.
What's your priority here? You want to see them make out, or you want to see a really bad rubbery snake get punched by Van Damme?
And it's great because punch the snake sounds like a dirty sexual euphemism. So it is actually ironic.
The second you said that, my mind instantly went to that. Like, oh wow, I'm going to use that in an inappropriate context at a later date. But yeah, his superpower and his USP has always been his kicks. And that's established from that shot at the beginning where he comes out of the diner that we're talking about. The bad guys are roughing up Yancy Butler, who plays Natasha Binder. Our hero steps in and he pulls back the long overcoat to reveal, not a gun, something better than a gun, his leg.
Yep.
Jean-Claude Van Damme's leg. I love that. I love that moment. I think it's like, we kind of know in a weird way, like this is the frequency that this movie's operating on. There's a sort of gleeful absurdism to it, but you're like, hell yeah, this is awesome. You know, it's a real Western moment. Yeah.
No, there is. You think it's going to be a gun, and it's this leg, and it's this sort of unveiling, which is, I have a feeling that the character, or maybe Van Damme in real life, uses the same strategy during his lovemaking with robes and things like that. I'm sure he gets way into that. But once he starts kicking, the leg is out. You know this is the cowboy. This is like Clint Eastwood with the gun, and just get the hell out of the way. I will say, Phil, there's one thing that I said the romantic story. There's another thing that I think is missing. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe JCVD does the splits in this film.
That's right. I don't think he does, or he doesn't show his behind as well, which is like we couldn't tick them off the list, and that's what we come to expect.
It's like when I see the guy from Fresh Prince, I want him to do the Carlton dance. Like I want Van Damme to do the splits. It is the signature move. He does it in Time Cop. He does it in almost all of them. Yep. I can't believe this didn't make it, but maybe he was again trying to move away from the splits. Like that's not my thing anymore.
Yeah. Well, this is it's definitely an evolution of it. It's somewhat more. I mean, it's a John Woo movie it's more than it's a Van Damme movie, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I think like the needle is just a little bit more in that direction. This is what I mean by that is that it isn't like Van Damme with his cadre of guys. Like you all see the same names on those movies, like Sheldon Littich and Mark DeSalle and the guy who does Paul Herzog who does the music. And it's like I was watching Kickboxer, and it's like fight scenes choreographed and directed by Van Damme. Like he is pulling the strings. He's the Warren Beatty of these martial arts movies. He's like across everything. This is different, right? This is an auteur. This is John Woo, arguably the greatest action director of all time, and he is in command of this movie. And that did lead to an interesting power struggle as well during the editing. About whether it was more a John Woo film or a Van Damme vehicle,
absolutely. And there was a kind of a battle on set from what I've heard. You're laying it out. It's funny that it's like this is Jean-Claude on his own, and I'm thinking Sandler, there's no Rock, there's no Spade, there's no Rob Schneider. It is just you, and you're working with Paul Thomas Anderson and Punch Drunk Love, and you better bring that, because this is not somebody getting kicked in the nuts and pretending that you have a twin sister. Like, it's totally different deal. This is Van Damme on his own carrying the film. It's kind of exciting.
You got to bring it. But fortunately, they partnered him with an incredible villain, bringing us to our next category of the villain, which is Lance Henriksen playing Emile Fouchon. How do you feel about this dude?
I mean, it's awesome. It was a really good actor. He was acting the hell out of this thing. And I'm trying to think about him in the pantheon of Van Damme nemesis. It's you don't have a real thespian. I can't think of one at all. You mentioned Bolo Young, who does his best acting with his left pack and his right pack, and I love it.
1,000%.
And I feel like that's my Uncle Bolo. But you actually got a guy who, when you're doing a scene with him, you got to keep up. I mean, that's a real dude who's been around the block a million times. He was in Terminator. He's been in like sci-fi royalty, action royalty. Like, you brought some heat to the set.
Yeah, and they don't get too many scenes together, but when they do, like at the end, when they kind of have a standoff, it's pretty electrifying. I love Lance Henriksen, and what I was thinking about this as well is, like, weirdly, he's in my favorite science fiction movie, which is Aliens, sci-fi action movie. He's in my favorite sci-fi horror movie, The Terminator, and of course he was originally cast as the Terminator. And there was some amazing stories about that, because the character was going to be more someone that stepped out of the shadows to blow your head off, was a little bit more nondescript. He's also in my favorite horror movie, Near Dark. And it's interesting, like Lance Henriksen's approach to his like characterization, because there was some details I discovered. I mean, and you had an acting background, right? And I'm interested in your approach and your thoughts on this, because he said I'm a primitive. I'm not an intellectual. He goes very much for physicality. For this film, he pinned his ears back to look like a Rottweiler. Like that, he for Near Dark, he like lost a ton of weight so that he looked gaunt, and you could almost see the veins in his chest, and he had like cracked, where he played a vampire, and he had cracked nails on his side. He seems to go kind of the external is the internal for him in a way. Like his approach to it is very sort of tactile and visceral. He's not sort of too heady about it. He's very physically connected, if that makes sense. But I think this is, I agree with you. I think it's one of the best villains that Van Damme's ever faced. It's a real actor. I think Ron Silver in Time Cop and Powers Booth in Sudden Death are worth a mention. You know, they're proper actors. Like there's studio movies. And of course, Dolph, lest we forget, in U-Sol. But it's hard to, I mean, this is an amazing villain, right? Like,
well, yeah, I think the Henriksen part, I think it can be summed up in about 5 seconds. In the final scene, I'm watching it. I watched it earlier this week for the first time in a while, and I'm like, that's incredible that Lance Henriksen did the pyrotechnics and was allowed himself to be set on fire. How did he do that? Because his entire jacket is in actual flames, and he's taking it off. I'm like, they would never do that with him. That he must have signed away his liability and all that. And then you come to find out that, no, it just caught on fire by accident. He stayed in character, stayed in the scene, took it off, and started screaming at the actors around him. That is so cool and so badass. That's like, in that little 4-second period, that tells you his commitment. He's not like, it's some Van Damme movie, I'm just collecting a check. No, he was going for the Oscar in that movie.
100%. And he said as well, like, I think he could probably care less about Van Damme, but he loved John Woo. And there was a lovely quote I found from him where he said he was such a fan of John Woo's films. He said they were so creative, they were so balletic, and they had this incredible philosophy in them. The violence was only a container for the philosophy. And he also said in the interview, in the making of, he said, I love John Woo. I would do all the animals in Noah's Ark for him. So I think it was like really lovely. It was really kind of touching. Yeah. and John Woo deserves that, right? Like, so he was clearly like, as you said, like committed. He was not taking a paycheck. He was like, I am here for this. It's a great character. He's got this deep, gravelly voice that gives him tremendous force. And he's also kind of quite a strong physical adversary as well, which you don't always get with some of these. Like we've talked about how Gruber is kind of not really, he's more of an intellectual combatant to McClane, but if they were to fight, he'd get his ass kicked, right? But not so much with this guy.
No, he can handle himself too. But it just occurred to me, help me with the actor's name who plays the heavy, who's the bald guy, who's like his muscle.
Arnold Vosloo?
Okay, so that is that's Hans. And that's Hans and what's his name?
Hans and Carl, totally.
That's Hans and Carl.
100%.
Like that. It's villain A and then villain 1 and then villain like 1A. And both of those guys are incredible. He went on to, we know him in The Mummy and all that thing. He played the villain in a season of 24 in which he was terrifying and was going to dirty bomb the whole world. So he could have carried it on his own. But you give Henriksen as well, and it feels like Hans and Carl, the one who's the mastermind and the one who is the psycho killer. It's awesome.
I totally agree. Well, let's talk about Arnold Vosloo as Pick Van Cleef for a second. Is he one of the best henchmen ever? And who would you have in your ultimate Hall of Fame henchman?
Oh my God, there's so many good ones. I think about obviously Carl. You know, I mentioned him, and there's like 3 of them in that movie. Yeah. I think, Bennett in the Commando movie was like a henchman who turned into an enemy, who became one by himself, even though his physique was absurd next to Arnold's and he had chainmail to cover it and weigh it down. That was a rough one. And they did that movie, the end of that movie, that they didn't do here, where before Bennett and Matrix are about to fight, Matrix gets shot so as to weaken him to make the fight more believable. Yes. And I kept thinking that they would have done that with Hard Target, but they just didn't. And the Henchman Hall of Fame needs to be a real thing.
That would have weakened Lance Henriksen. Doesn't need to be wounded. This isn't like Ben Gazzara going up against Swayze at the end of Roadhouse. Like Henriksen feels like he has a fair shot at, like, just with sheer ferocity, I think he could take on Van Damme, you know?
I will say, if my job is to hunt soldiers and I am a professional killer and I have all the weapons in my disposal, I would probably choose a firearm that shoots more than one shot without manually reloading, just to cover my bases in case I miss. It's really cool, and he makes her load him and everything, and there's all this cool innuendo and a power move there. It's really, really putting your lot of stock in that one shot, because the other guy's got a shotgun, and you got this thing with bam and done. The gun's cool, but it's a risk.
But that's how much of a badass he is. So that gun apparently is used for killing buffalo. It's a Thompson Center Arms Contender. And apparently that was Henriksen's choice. It was a character choice because that gun was used by Mad Dog in Hard Boiled, who was the sort of main henchman in that movie. And Lance Henriksen liked that and was like, I want to use that gun because I'm so above the fray. I only need one shot, right? Until he finds a hard target. I love those. Those two together are like, I could watch a million movies with those guys.
They should have had a side on this movie. Now they would do it, and those two would have a 10-episode Netflix series, or there would be an origin story or something, and I'd be there.
Sign me up. Mm-hmm. They have great chemistry. Okay, so we're on to our section.
I'm sorry, Philip, I just thought of my all-time favorite henchman.
Please.
And it's from a wildly different era. 8mm Machine is my favorite henchman with the gimp mask. And that, I mean, if you know the movie, I'm sure it's a very, very dark, sick
This is an incredible pull. I love it.
But I love Machine. That's his name. And then he fights Nicolas Cage. He gets stabbed. That's my guy.
I think it's Chris Bauer. Is that his name? Who was from the actor from The Wire, who played Machine. And when he's unmasked, because you're expecting him to look, he's Satan himself, and he looks like kind of just like a software programmer or something, you know. And it makes it more terrifying. No, big fan of Machine as a henchman, if not for his actions in the world of 8mm, which is a pretty grim movie.
It really is.
But that's a great pull. For the record, we talked about this on our last Boy Scout episode, but I'm a big Milo guy.
Oh, hell yes.
You know.
God, I got to meet that guy once. That actor who plays Milo, and he's left the planet at this point. But years ago, I lived in LA, and I was in a coffee shop with him, and he was just sitting there, and we just started talking like just normal conversation. And I go, I gotta ask you, man, like, you were in the last Boy Scout. He goes, yes, I was. I got to punch Bruce Willis, and he was really cool, and he told the whole story of it. I love that. He was a great guy. I believe he's passed away. But he was ready to talk Last Boy Scout all day. It was pretty cool.
Oh, man. Yeah, Taylor Negron. What an amazing performance. I truly think that is one of the best. Me and Liam had an argument about it in that episode, because he was all about Busey and Lethal Weapon. And I was like, I was pushing for Milo. But, Machine definitely up there too. But that's nice to hear about Taylor Negron. I love that guy. All right, so we're on to our section about the action. We're assessing the action in this movie. One of the things that occurred to me about this, just to sort of frame this a little bit, was as I was watching it again, this movie's kind of like a sports car that moves through the gears, right? We kind of start in second. Okay, we start with an action sequence. It's fairly well choreographed. By the midsection of the movie, there's that incredible motorcycle chase and shootout on the bridge. Okay, we'll move into third gear. Okay, we're stepping it up. Then there's a helicopter in the house, like pursuing him through the bio. We're into fourth gear now, and then by the finale, we're fifth gear. We're flying for this incredible 20-minute full throttle. That's when it's a straight John Woo movie. I mean, what are your favorite action sequences in this movie?
Well, I think the point when it breaks the John Woo scale, when it's the Spinal Tap turned up to 11, is the sequence whereby Chance is on horseback with a shotgun. There's the killers in the helicopter with their own guns, and they're having a gunfight, probably not been done before or since. The helicopter to horseback gunfight with the shotgun, which whole point of it can't even really shoot far distances like that, but he's pecking them off. That takes incredible skill. So I really liked that moment, and it reminded me, to bring back The Fugitive, it was the same riverbank that Richard Kimball is running along when he's first trying to escape, and even with the helicopter being flown by Deputy Gerard. So I love that moment, and I love all the Brimley, of course, because it's hilarious. But that was like 11 out of 10 when he's the horse versus helicopter.
Okay, that's interesting that was your. Usually, we talk a lot on the show about how I'm obsessed with helicopters, and that almost every film that we do has a helicopter in it. And if there's a helicopter involved, I'm there. My criteria generally to see movies are helicopter, SWAT teams, and aliens. If it has one of those, at least one of those three, I'm definitely gonna go see it. If you have all three, then I'm very, very happy. But the action in this film is what makes it, I think, transcendent. Like, this is what truly elevates it. The choreography, Woo's just mastery. It really is given space to shine in a few kind of key set pieces. The one on the bridge where he's bouncing on the motorbike, right? Is pretty fantastic. The sequence, as you say, with the horse and helicopter chase, you don't see that every day. But for me, the Mardi Gras graveyard sequence at the end is where this film is just like jaw-droppingly amazing in terms as an action movie. I mean, what do you think about that finale? Because for me, that's like pretty much as good as it gets.
It's very original. The optics and the visuals are very strange, and you have to remind yourself, like, what are all these things? What is this crown? What is this clown? Oh, it's Mardi Gras. How what a creative idea. Yeah. And I like, even before then, the Inception. One of my things, you mentioned helicopters that you love. I love any situation in a movie where someone is inside some sort of edifice or building, and the bad guys are outside, and they say something like, "There's no way out. There's no way out of this thing," and there always is a way. And
that was a good Henriksen, by the way. That definitely.
Oh, not bad. I can bring it down. So he screams it, and he tells his guys, and there's a million movies like that. There's a memorable part at the end of Young Guns where they just can't get out, and they're surrounded by everybody, and they have to shoot their way out. So it's a great scene. I love at the end that Brimley helps, but then doesn't help. I loved it. And I love the back-to-back that they do, and then they just start shooting. The creativity. We've seen a million final stage in some sort of warehouse, including like a Stallone does it in Cobra. They just find these warehouses next to highway, and that's where they get in the shootout. But you've never seen the visuals like that with the Mardi Gras stuff, which I thought was some fun flavor.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love it. It really is kind of a unique sequence. All right, we're going to touch on... well, let's talk about Wilford, right? Like, you just brought him up. I just want to step back. Feels like you've got a lot of hot takes on Wilford Brimley, and I'm here for them. What's your relationship with this cuddly icon in our lives that is Wilford Brimley?
Wilford Brimley was my grandpa growing up. That's my guy. I fell in love with him in a show that he used to do called Our House back in the 80s, starring Deidre Hall and Chad Allen and Shannon Doherty, in which he was really the lead in the show. And then the real deep dive, for whatever reason, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I used to had the video cassette of Star Wars: The Battle for Endor. and it's this off-brand, like kind of it's on brand, but it's this offshoot of Star Wars, like not the ones Disney's doing now. It's basically The Mandalorian, but 30 years ago. They're like, let's make side movies. And Wilford Brimley was an action hero, and he fights, and he flies a spaceship, and he rescues people, and he kicks some ass. So imagine in 1993, you don't know who's in the movie. You just show up, and it's Van Damme, and he's going to kick some people. Not only does he show up, he shows up at roughly, I don't know, the 85% mark. And he's riding horses and making moonshine and shooting arrows. And he's exactly the perfect human being that I want to be when I'm that age or when I'm this age, and just kills the movie and does an accent fully committed. So my question, Philip, is when they came to Wilford Brimley and they say, we got this part. It's a very small part. You're going to ride a horse. I know you're getting up there in age. You're going to shoot a bow and arrow and drink booze. I think at this point he's coming off The Firm, in which he has a big part in a huge movie. Yeah. He's like, I'm in. I want to do it. What a crazy choice by him to say yes to this.
Yeah, he's certainly not what you would. You would think of as like your first choice. It's almost like. I don't know, like the Sam Elliott character in Roadhouse, right? Like that kind of like ancillary helper, mentor. We talk about this a lot, like a lot of these movies have that kind of Al Powell type character that circles the action and provides moral support or maybe a little bit of assistance. He kind of in a weird way falls into that category, but no, you ain't seen nothing like Uncle Duvet in anything before or since. I mean, God broke the mold with Wilford Brimley, right? Like,
in such little screen time, he does every cool thing. He hotwires the bombs. He's drinking booze. He's got the shotgun for you. He takes care of the woman. He speaks the accent. He rides the horse. He all but kills the bad guy. He survives to the thing with his flask. Like, don't you want to hang with him? I'd much rather hang with him than with Chance.
Yeah. He's a hoot. He's a veritable hoot. Well, this is really sort of in our humor section as well, like because that is where the humor kind of comes from with Wilford Brimley. His late appearance adds a lot of eccentric warmth and charm. But actually, the first half of the film, when we touched on this a little bit earlier, has kind of a somber tone, has kind of like there's a melancholy to it with the scenes with the homeless community, and I was thinking, like, especially with the character of Roper, who I want to talk about a little bit, who was one of the guys that gets hunted, who is one of the veterans they hunt. There's a sort of theme of dignity, people trying to maintain their dignity in this terrible situation. And it speaks to Woo's, again, we've talked about him as the poet of action cinema. And the early scenes really have a kind of like quite a delicate touch. That's all abandoned by the end when we get into this snake incredible shootout, snake punching and Wilford just on a horse kicking ass. The leading lady in this movie, Yancy Butler. What are your thoughts on her character, her performance on this role?
I don't think it's aged great. She doesn't ever have the moment that really breaks through of a lot of empowerment. She doesn't fight. She doesn't kick any ass. She's kind of scared the whole time, and she needs the man to take care of her, which is an interesting choice, because if you wanted that character, there were a million actresses to play it. Yancy can kick some ass, and as we know, went on to go do Witchblade, and I remember she caught my eye in a movie called Drop Zone.
Drop Zone. Oh, it's on our list. Yeah.
Okay, great. Wesley Snipes. What is it? Is that Die Hard in the air? Like,
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it's not the greatest character. Look, she acts the best she can. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. I would have liked to see a little more of like a character arc where she's kicking some ass at some point, which she really doesn't.
Yeah, she was kind of uncomfortable with the damsel in distress stuff, and she doesn't get a ton to do, especially in the second half of the movie. Once it shifts from the like investigative plot to the action, she does have one moment where she blows a guy away. Those two guys are called Frick and Frack, by the way. Don't ask. I got no further data on that. Those two henchmen. The one is like, get out of town, do it today, and point her titties north, like this sort of Cajun nightmare stereotype, but that she ends up blowing away. So she just get one moment, but then Duvet is like, give me the gun. So, but one thing she did say that I wanted to touch on that I thought was lovely on the special features was she said Jean-Claude Van Damme was a gentleman. He was the dancer and John Woo was the choreographer. And I thought, I like that, So yeah, I really like her in this movie. I think she's cool, but unfortunately she doesn't get a ton to do. All right, now we're going to move on to a section I think you're going to love.
I can't wait.
Which is called the Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards, and this is where we give out awards for various nominees for within the action genre. Okay,
Okay.
so our first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for the best line. And my nominees are, and you feel free to add any if you have
Yeah.
any, but the ones I had, I'm very partial to "Wakey, wakey, you fat fuck."
That was going to be mine.
I mean,
That's great. That was mine.
It's a zinger. I mean, just perfect.
It's perfect.
That's what Pick Van Cleef says to Randall when he slaps him in the stomach when he wakes. It's a nice wake up call. That's what my wife says to me every morning.
Is that right?
She slaps me in the abdomen and says, "Wakey, wakey, you fat fuck." To which I go rise and get a coffee. The next one I have is, "Now you understand why we insist on payment up front."
Yeah.
Which is what Fouchon says after finishing off the client, Mr. Zanon, when it goes bad. And then I've got two from Van Damme. When Fouchon asks Chance why he bothered to get into this, and he responds, "Poor people get bored too," which I thought was kind of a good one.
Beautiful.
And the final blockbuster line that I had was, "Hunting season is over."
Hell yeah.
Do you have
Last
anything
line.
to add, or would you have a nominee out of those for best line?
I do like when he tries the gumbo at the end, and she says, "How is it?" And what he says, unconscionable or offensive or something. Is not even close. That's his first line that he speaks. But listen, we're wasting time.
Yeah,
The idea, wakey, wakey, you fat fuck. That's an incredible. That should be a meme. How come people don't meme that? Because they don't know Hard Target. Watch it, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get. It's so fun to say. I recommend that people say it, especially to your loved one. All right, the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. My nominees are
Go on.
Wilford Brimley as Uncle Clarence Duvet,
Yeah.
Casey Lemons as Detective May Mitchell, who is the New Orleans cop who kind of helps them early in the investigation. Willie C. Carpenter as Elijah Roper, one of Fouchon's first victims. He's the veteran that they kind of trick into hunting, and we spent quite a lot of time with him. I think he's fantastic. Arnold Vosloo as Pick Van Cleef, and Lance Henriksen as Emile Fouchon. Who would be your vote? Please feel free to add anyone if there's anyone you like. But if you don't, who would you vote for?
The police officer you mentioned who gets into the woman who gets killed in the street. I always look at her and I'm like, oh, that's Clarice Starling's friend from Silence of the Lambs. Right. That's her, and I always look at her that way. It's not her. I would also submit that the exceptional fucking thief award. I think we can debate who steals Die Hard. I still have a really soft spot for Ellis. Ellis is electricity every single time he's on screen. So maybe there should be an Ellis award too. Listen, again. The movie could just end. He punches the snake, they chase him into the factory, and it's over. But they said, no. We're going to inject a national treasure like Wilford Brimley, who is known to a huge part of the community for just saying the word diabetes. And we're going to show that he's a great actor, he can crack some skulls while he drinks moonshine. It is Brimley in a long shot. I can't believe he's not on the poster.
Okay, all right, that's very fair. All right, well, you might like our next one. We maybe need to come up with an Ellis one, but we do have the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie.
Sure.
My nominees are Mr. Lopaki, the first client who hunts and kills Binder. He's played by Bob Apisa, who you may recognize as Senator Baynard's bodyguard in The Last Boy Scout. He kind of pops up. He's a stuntman. Mr. Zanon, played by Joe Warfield, who's the businessman who hunts Roper and then kind of gets second thoughts once he's wounded him.
Yeah.
Ted Raimi, brother of executive producer Sam Raimi, is the man in the street who doesn't help Roper. Dr. Morton, played by Marco St. John, who's the corrupt coroner with the nasty cough. Mm-hmm. And Randall Poe, played by Elliot Keener, who is the portly, sleazy middleman who finds Fouchon's victims for him. Who would be your pick for Dick of the Movie?
You know, Raimi in the street. I said, I know that guy. And I have not known who that was until you just mentioned it. I said, didn't that guy go on to be in Ally McBeal or something? I've seen that guy in different movies, and he just completely just says, get away from me and is the dick. I'm going with him. Help me out with that actor. He ended up being other things. Yeah,
so Ted Raimi came up in our Patriot Games episode. He plays a CIA analyst with Harrison Ford, and he pops up in Sam Raimi's movies. But yeah, he kind of has his own career, and he's in a lot of these movies in this time in the 90s.
Yes,
he's still around.
That's the guy.
Doing work. All right, cool. Interesting choice. And our final Oscar category is the best death, which usually is presented by Marco, i.e. Liam doing a very enthusiastic impression of Marco from Die Hard. The no more table. Where are you going, pal? That guy. So shout out to Liam. We miss you. Okay, my nominees are for this one, for best death. Let's go through the peephole. Dr. Morton being shot in the eye through the peephole by Van Cleef. Roper, when he steals the weapon from Mr. Zanan and shoots him in the graveyard. That was a pretty cool, unexpected moment. Chance scooping up the gasoline can and shooting it midair with the shotgun. That's pretty...
Oh my God, he kicks
sick.
it.
Yeah.
That was badass. That was like the X Games or something. Yeah. That was so cool.
Van Cleef's death, when Van Damme is like, he throws a grenade, it explodes, Van Damme slides backwards across the floor with two handguns, shoots him multiple times at close range, and Fouchon getting a grenade down the pants. Thoughts, moans, groans, ideas?
First of all, I used to work with Marco. I used to, he and I were, he used to, if you can look it up, he used to be on Days of Our Lives. He had a recurring part, and I was on Days of Our Lives for 4 years, and I used to work on him. And I think 2.5 years in, I said, oh my God, is that No More Table guy from Die Hard? And it was. And I asked him about it, and he said, yes, no more table. And people always would say that to him. Really nice guy, just like the other story I told. Happy to tell Die Hard stories.
This is incredible.
All about how cool Bruce was, and they smoked a lot of cigarettes together. It was awesome. So I knew Marco back in the day. Wow. I wish I should pick him. I have to tell you, the death that shocked me the most is the idea that he when he catches the sex line pamphlet guy trying to leave town to go see his mother, and just shotguns him right in the face in broad daylight and next to the street. That was a brutal death. And then it goes all over the back windshield, like Marvin in Pulp Fiction. Like, I could not believe. I'm like, oh. When I was a kid, I'm like, they're not really going to kill him. He's just going to threaten them. And I think, no, boom, blows his head off. The 90s were wild. So I'm going to go off the ballot and say that one. Kicking the gasoline can is a hilarious, hilarious thing that they kept in the movie. So what is the criteria? The funniest or best?
Just best death.
All right. So I sidetracked. The gasoline can kick up plus shoot is definitely it.
Okay, good call. So Kyle hosted a fantastic podcast called 10 Questions with Kyle Brandt, where he interviewed and quizzed such luminaries as Matthew McConaughey, Viggo Mortensen, Tim Robbins, J.K. Simmons, Jim Belushi. I love that one because I'm a big Red Heat guy. Oh, cool. As well as numerous NFL superstars. But today, if he's willing to do so, Kyle will be our contestant for Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, where the scores can really change. So the rules are simple. There are 3 questions. Each time you can phone a friend, you can radio Al Powell, and I will provide you with 1 clue. Okay? So you have one clue available for each question. Don't worry too much if you don't know. This is also for our listeners at home. It's for our listeners at home. Don't worry about it. It's just a bit of fun. It's just a bit of fun. All right. Okay. Question number 1. Which legendary movie star and action icon, also no stranger to a mullet, did John Woo originally want to play the lead in this film?
Chuck Norris.
That's not the correct answer. You can phone. Do you want to call Al Powell?
No.
No?
Al Powell can sit down there and have his yellow dye number 5. The answer is Kurt Russell.
Yes, well done. Correct. Kurt Russell was who he originally, when he got the script, that was who he was originally wanted. He was unavailable for like 2 years, so they went to Van Damme, who had been Universal's original choice. Okay, now they get a little bit harder. Okay, but I think I'm fascinated to know if you'll get this one. Okay. Number 2. Chuck Farrer, the writer of Hard Target, previously co-wrote a 1990 action movie that was named after a famous elite military unit that he was actually part of in real life. Can you name that movie?
Navy SEALs?
Yes! This is why I had you on the show, Kyle. Like
Michael Biehn,
that's my
Charlie
guy.
Sheen. There's a hold your water under breath moment. It goes on to be made fun of in Kevin Smith's Clerks years later. Navy SEALs. I rented it from Blockbuster when I was in like 6th grade. Great.
Amazing. Yes, I love Navy SEALs. I think it's great. And yeah, the writer Chuck Farrer was actually a Navy SEAL.
I almost said Delta Force, and then I said no. Navy SEAL, stick with it. It got me home.
You were on the right lines, and you were right to be patient. You didn't even need the clue.
No.
All right, this is our last question, which sometimes I like to call convoluted corner. Okay, but I think this will be in your wheelhouse. Okay. Bodybuilder Sven Ole Thorsen appears in Hard Target as Stefan, the barrel-chested, cigar-chomping client in the colorful shirt who joins the Bayou hunting party towards the end of the film. Which thematically similar 1987 film about humans
What's the matter?
hunting...
Steroids make you deaf? Get him out of here now! I guess it's because of steroids. He is Damon Killian's bodyguard. He is in The Running Man. He's supposed to have this confrontation with the Mad Dog Ben Richards at the end of the movie, and he decides to walk away. I watched it earlier a few days ago. Like I said, I'm like, oh, I didn't know Running Man guy was in this. Amazing. It's definitely The Running Man. Final answer.
Absolutely correct. This guy doesn't even need me to finish the questions. Yeah, Sven plays the ICS security guard in The Running Man. What's also weird, he has an uncredited part in Predator as one of the Russian officers in the camp that gets raided. Also a movie about hunting. So it was quite a 1987 for him.
He does get killed by Schwarzenegger. I believe he's the one where Arnold kicks open the door and says, knock, knock, and then he kills somebody. I think that's the guy. So obviously he had a way into these action movies. But
he was bros with Arnold. He's in all his movies. Sven Ole Awesome, as he's affectionately referred to as.
That was
wow.
Fun.
That was fantastic. You did amazing in the quiz. This has been an absolute blast. Do you have any final thoughts about Hard Target? Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, you know what? I think one of the hallmarks of a great action movie is get in quick and get out quick. And when watching earlier this week, I did not remember how quick the movie ends after the villain is vanquished. So I did the work, and I want to share it with you at Die Hard on a Blank. I timed on my phone how long it goes between the time that the grenade blows up and Hendrickson is killed and the credits roll is 48 seconds.
Wow.
It is well under a minute. It's not even close. The guy's dead. Get the people out of here and get them in their cars and go home. And I respect it.
There's a lot to be said for that. Like Karate Kid kind of ends that. Like end on the high point, get out. Cut to credits.
It's the best.
There's a lot to be said for that. I totally agree. And then it's Born on the Bayou and everybody's happy heading to their cars. So thank you so much, Kyle, for doing this. You are welcome back anytime. Awesome. Please join us again. I'll send you a bunch of movies. Like hit us up anytime. So thank you so much, Kyle. It's been absolute delight to have you on the show. Please come back. Okay, please rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend. Find us on Twitter and Instagram. We're at DieHardOAB. I'm on Twitter at Philip Gawthorne. I'm shouting into the void out there. Kyle is on Twitter being far more influential and funny than I am. You can email us at diehardoab@gmail.com. Next time on the show, we'll be doing Striking Distance, the 1993 action thriller starring Bruce Willis as a Pittsburgh River cop hunting a serial killer. And thank you once again, Kyle, and we'll be back next time with some new FBI guys. Thank you all.
Thanks, Philip.
All right.
Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.